more good ideas, Jim?
Yes, I have. One more, and it depends on the lieutenant's loyalty. If she fails us, we better get used to herding goats.
Bridge to all decks. It's time for a brand new episode of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mance.
I'm Steve Morris, and I was fascinated by Greek mythology as a kid, so I am very excited about talking about today's episode.
Today's episode is literally Star Trek's version of a Greek tragedy. It is Who Mourns for Adonais, an episode that I always liked for a whole lot of reasons, but I haven't liked it this much because rewatching it, I've discovered so many things that we have brought to the table with Enterprise Incidents, and I'm guessing that you have a lot to say about this episode, Steve.
I do, and it's getting redundant at this point, but same here. I watched it again. I was like, oh my God, there's so much here, which I had never thought about before.
Well, Who Mourns for Adonais, I think it's the fourth episode produced for season 2. It was the 34th overall episode to film, which was done over 7 days between May 31st and June 8th, 1967. It was the second episode to air during Star Trek's second season on September 22nd, 1967, so it was the 31st episode to air overall. Teleplay was written by Gilbert Ralston. He is a writer, is a former newspaper man from Ireland. On TV, he wrote for shows like Naked City, Ben Casey, and Gentle Ben. And on film, he wrote Kona Coast, Willard, and Ben in the early 70s. The episode was directed by Mark Daniels. And as you can imagine, especially when you look at the production design, the production values for this episode.
Went over budget.
It went over budget. Yes. I mean, of course it did. You're talking about a budget of $185,000. This one went over budget by $18,623. The total cost for Who Mourns for Adonais was $203,623. The score. You gotta love the score for this episode. It's a mostly complete score. They did use some music cues here and there for prior episodes, but composed by Fred Steiner. It was his 6th score for Star Trek, and the score was recorded on July 12th, 1967. The visual effects for this episode, and there are a lot of them. You have the effect of the hand holding the Enterprise, the effect of the thunderbolts from Apollo, and of course the amazing effects of the Enterprise firing on Apollo's temple towards the end of the episode. Spoiler alert. But I just think overall, I've always felt that Who Mourns for Adonais is a really outstanding top-tier episode. So when we were talking about the prior episode, Steve, Friday's Child, my discovery of that episode, or one of them, was that there actually was a metaphor for that episode about maybe Vietnam, but it was an idea that was not explored.
Right.
But the ideas in this episode are explored in such a great deal in a way that it really is thought-provoking in the best possible sense of what makes Star Trek so thought-provoking. What if the Greek gods were aliens from another planet? But great performances here, especially from guest star Michael Forrest as Apollo. The range that he shows in this episode. The costume design by William Ware Bill Tice. Again, the score by Fred Steiner. But also, just rewatching this episode, I had an epiphany about Apollo that I will get to. But when you were growing up, Steve, when you were young, little Steve Morris, what did you think of Who Mourns for Adonais?
I always liked it. Like I said, I really did love Greek myths. I love the Arthurian legends. I read that stuff all the time, and so this was one that fit right in. I do have an embarrassing story to tell you.
Okay.
Which is, I don't know if I mentioned it to you before, but I'm a little bit dyslexic. Not severely so, but letters do flop around on me, and so I did struggle with spelling and things like that. And one of the, which I didn't know when I was a kid, but one of the techniques that dyslexics use to compensate is that sometimes if you can't read the letters in the middle of the word, but you can see the shape of the whole word. So you see, like, I see the first letter and the last letter, and you use context clues. I didn't know that I was doing this when I was reading as a kid. I only found it out much later, but use context clues to figure out, well, what would that word be? And so for years, I saw the title of this show, And it literally makes no sense. Adonais or Adonai, that's a Jewish word. That's
For
Jewish
God.
God, which I grew up with. I grew up with hearing the prayer and hearing that word. But there's nothing related to Judaism whatsoever in this episode. And that word made no sense to me. And so I didn't read it as Adonais.
What did you read it as?
Adonis.
That's very interesting.
Because that's a Greek god. It has mostly the same letters. It starts with an A and ends with an S. And so I just, the title would come up. I go, oh, it's Who Mourns for Adonis, which also didn't make any sense at all, by the way, because this isn't Adonis, it's Apollo.
Yeah.
But like, it literally, I think I was in college when I heard someone actually say the name out loud. And like, I know there are dyslexics who have this experience many times, and people who aren't dyslexic too, where you read a word over and over again, never heard it, and then realized that you were reading something completely different. So until college, I thought this was Who Mourns for Adonis.
Steve, I have an equally embarrassing story for you for a different reason.
Okay.
Okay, the story is that I, too, for many, many, many years, even growing into adulthood, saw the episode title and read it in my head and even said it out loud in conversation with my Star Trek friends as Who Mourns for Adonis? Who Mourns for Adonis? That's
You
just
did
the way
too.
it looked. I always referred to it as Who Mourns for Adonis. And my friends never corrected me. They said the same thing. It was always Who Mourns for Adonis. I was corrected on the title. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
By Apollo himself,
Oh my God.
Michael Forrest.
Wow.
I was hosting a Star Trek convention in the early 90s at Burbank, here in LA.
Yeah.
And Michael Forrest was one of the guests. So when I introduced him to take the stage, ladies and gentlemen, so excited to announce one of the greatest guest stars to grace the Star Trek stage, Michael Forrest from Who Mourns for Adonis. Applause, everybody. Michael Forrest takes the stage. He takes the mic. Thank you, thank you. Everybody's applauding for him. He turns to me. He goes, by the way, the title is Who Mourns for Adonais. So not only was I corrected by Apollo himself, I was corrected by Apollo in front of a group of Star Trek fans.
So I thought I was sharing an embarrassing story. Your story is way better.
I was like, whoa, okay. The Greek god Apollo just corrected me. I felt like I was big as Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy, after Apollo grew in this episode. But you know what?
All right. Now I have a question. So
Yeah.
we put Facebook questions out. Here's my question. How many people mispronounced or misread the title of this show like Scott and I apparently did?
Yeah. Who else referred to it as Who Mourns for Adonis? Let us know. And full disclosure, the episode Gamesters of Triskelion. When I was growing up well into adulthood, I saw that as Gamesters of Trixelon.
Well, but this happens all the time. Like there's in the Legion of Superheroes, there's Chameleon Boy. Now, Chameleon is spelled with a CH, so that was Chamelon Boy to me. I mean, there's so many, like the English language is so terrible, and we could do literally whole podcasts on all the things that's wrong with English spelling. But for a little dyslexic kid, it was really rough for me growing up.
Well, I'm going to have to, clear the air on our embarrassing stories about Who Mourns for Adonis. But Gene Roddenberry actually came up with the concept in December of 1966. And at that time, Roddenberry had referred to this as Olympus Revisited. So when Gilbert Ralston came on to do his initial story outline on March 8th, 1967, he changed the title to Last of the Gods. Ralston wrote a first draft teleplay dated April 7th, 1967, in which he finally referred to the episode as Who Mourns for Adonais. Gene Kuhn wrote a second script polish dated May 15th. Dorothy Fontana did a rewrite, a revised final draft teleplay on May 26th. And Gene Roddenberry did a script polish, a second revised final draft teleplay on May 29th. Like I mentioned, this is Fred Steiner's sixth musical score for Star Trek after The Corbomite Maneuver, Mud's Women, Charlie X, Balance of Terror, and What Are Little Girls Made Of? Absolutely fantastic. And you could see that the best of the best really had their hand. In addition to Ralston, you had Gene Kuhn, Dorothy Fontana, and Roddenberry himself all taking passes at this teleplay.
Wow. Would you like to know some of the things going on in the world when this was filmed?
Yes, would love to hear it.
Well,
all of them.
There was some heavy stuff that we were building up to that is still going to go on. We're certainly going to get into. But first, a lighter item. The very first franchise of McDonald's to open up outside the U.S. opened on June 1st in Richmond, British Columbia.
Did you ever see the movie The Founder?
I did.
With Michael Keaton?
Yes.
That is excellent.
I think so. I think the first half of the movie, in particular, meeting the McDonald's brothers and seeing the whole way they worked it all out, I loved. And then the second half of the movie is still really good, but it's kind of sad and upsetting, you know.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a good movie.
The Founder, for those of you who've never seen The Founder, highly, highly recommend it. My pitch about The Founder, which is the McDonald's story, and Ray Kroc,
Roy. No, I don't remember. Ray,
Okay.
I think it's Ray.
So my pitch for The Founder is that it's the social network with fast food.
Sure.
Because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, totally. So on the 2nd of June, 1967, an American F-105 was attacking a North Vietnamese port when it accidentally hit a Soviet diesel, killing a Soviet sailor, a merchant sailor. And at first the U.S. denied it, but then it admitted to it for 16 days later, which is pretty scary. There was rioting in Boston, and this, by the way, we're going to hear this a lot, of race riots throughout the United States, and Boston certainly had some. It was definitely a rough year. And then on the same day, on June 2nd, a Israeli Defense Force patrol battled with 4 Syrian soldiers on the Syrian border. 1 Syrian and 2 Israelis were killed. This is the first deaths in what is going to become called the 6 Days War. And that's where we are right now. And I have an admission to make.
What's that?
Another one, more serious than the than Who Mourns for Adonais. So it's something we've been talking about, really relates to Star Trek throughout this whole series, is how one of the things that has to happen for our characters is that you look in the world in a certain frame, and then that has to shift when you get new information. So we see that in Devil in the Dark. We see that in Errand of Mercy. We see that in Metamorphosis, which we just did. That happens a lot, and I just had one.
What's that?
So I grew up. I'm Jewish. You were Jewish. I don't know if you had this experience, but I went to classes at the temple, and as a little kid, we did Jewish cooking and Jewish music and dance. And as I got a little bit older in 4th grade and 5th grade, it was more about history and about, it was biblical history, but it was also, this is where I met a Holocaust survivor for the first time. This is where I first saw films of the Holocaust. And then this was also where I first learned about the state of Israel. And the narrative I was taught at that time was a very unsurprisingly pro-Israel. Israel's this scrappy nation that has all surrounded by enemies and is defending themselves bravely. And all that's true. And it's also more complicated, as you would imagine. And even, I remember in 6th grade, I mean, you know me, I was the same in 6th grade. 6th grade is when I started to really question and push back and go, wait a minute, well, what about the other side? And there are certain things about the way that story was framed for me that stuck. And one of the framings was that Israel fought to defend themselves. Right. They didn't attack. If the neighbors wanted to be peaceful, they were going to be peaceful.
Right, okay.
That's not exactly right.
Huh.
And even though I've studied Israel and the Palestinian problem, and I don't want to get into it at all. This is not what's appropriate for this show. It is exceptionally complicated. That's all I'll say about it. But the reality is, on June 5th, this is the beginning of the 6-Day War. Israel launched a surprise preemptive strike on Egypt. Shortly after dawn at 7 a.m., they launched 183 fighter planes. By 7:30, all but 12 of Israeli fighters were in the air. At 7:48, they turned south towards Egypt. A radar operator in Jordan saw them, and he put out the code word in Arabic to say there's an attack coming. The code word was inab, which means grape in Arabic. Egypt had changed the code words the day before, so they didn't react. Attacks began simultaneously on 10 Egyptian air bases. More than half of their fleet, more than half their air force was destroyed while sitting on the ground. This is like Pearl Harbor. And the destruction was so complete that even the airplanes that were left really couldn't take off.
Wow. Huh.
So I didn't know that, even though I knew a lot about the 6-Day War, and I knew the results of the 6-Day War. But I didn't know that the first strike is Israel's. And this is like, and it's not, I will say it again, Israel and the Arab nations around it and the Palestinians, these are unbelievably complicated problems.
100%, yes.
And yet, and even though I knew that, and even though I've spent a lot of time pushing back on the narrative that I was raised with, that framing still was in my head. And I didn't know this one fact, that they attacked first.
Whenever we discussed current events while these episodes were filmed, You know, I've commented like, oh, can you imagine like, you know, you're driving to work in the morning, going to the Desilu lot, Stage 9,
Yeah.
you're listening to your radio, and you're hearing about all these events. Well, Michael Forrest, while being interviewed for Mark Cushman's book, These Are the Voyages, said that while they were filming Who Mourns for Adonais, a couple of people had their transistor radios by their side, and they were all checking in with the radio while the 6-Day War was going on, because that was going on while this episode was being filmed. So, you know, that is definitely something where we know for sure that, because we're hearing it from Michael Forrest, that they were absolutely following this as it was happening during the filming of Who Mourns for Adonais.
Well, and our two leads are Jewish. I mean, so of course they would be listening. I'm sure lots of the other people working on the show were Jewish as well. So right at this moment, they attack Egypt, and then they call up the King Hussein of Jordan and say, listen, we don't want to have a fight with you, so this is your chance. Let's just have a, you know, agree not to attack each other. And Jordan responds with shooting shells across the Israeli border into Israel. And now the 6-Day War is really on. On the same day, Moscow calls up Washington. It is the very first use of the hotline, the red phone, the red line between Washington and Moscow ever since it was created in 1963 after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they say, stop supporting Israel. That's the Soviet Union's message to the United States. Put pressure on them to have a ceasefire. On June 6th, Israeli forces capture the rest of Jerusalem, the east side of the city. They don't use any artillery because they don't want to hit any of the religious buildings.
Sure, yeah.
Nasser, the president of Egypt, gets in a plane to survey the Sinai and the battlefield and almost gets shot down. Wow. Like there's literally an Israeli fighter jet that's strafing it that just misses it. They didn't know that Nasser was on board. All of the Arab oil exporting nations, they halt all shipments of oil to the U.S., to the U.K. because of their support for Israel, and they closed the Suez Canal. Like, this is as serious to the world as anything you could possibly imagine.
Absolutely.
Jerusalem is fully liberated on June 7th, and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan says, we have reunited the torn city, the capital of Israel. We have returned this most sacred shrine, never depart from it again. And Jewish worshippers visited the Wailing Wall for the first time since 1948. Arab houses around the wall were demolished to make room for Israeli worshippers. At noon, Israel and Jordan signed a ceasefire. That's how fast this is. So a couple days ago, they said, hey, let's not fight each other. Jordan attacked them. A couple days later, ceasefire. On June 8th, 34 U.S. Navy sailors were killed when Israel mistakenly attacked them in the Med. And then on June 8th, Egypt agreed to a ceasefire. After Israel had defeated all their forces in the Sinai, and not only that, they blocked their escape. So they couldn't get back to Egypt. And so Egypt agreed to a ceasefire. And the Soviet Union has now put its navy in the Mediterranean, and they're moving in and out of U.S. ships. This is all really, really, really scary.
Yeah, it sure is.
So the Soviet Union has always had close contacts with the nation of Syria. In fact, Russia still has close contacts in Syria, which we've heard about in all the trouble that's going on in the Middle East right now. And they want to support Syria against Israeli attacks. So they tell the Syrian government, we're going to drop our own paratroopers onto the Israeli border to help defend Syria. And that is on June 8th. And we're going to have to wait until next week to find out what happens.
We'll have to wait till we do our deep dive on Amok Time to figure out what happens. Unbelievable. Wow. What a week. Yeah. That is, you know, the last few episodes we did, Metamorphosis and Friday's Child, especially Friday's Child, you know, we were leading up to this. So to hear that all this was happening during the making of this episode, and you know, they still have to film like it's, you know, they got to do their jobs. It's really incredible to put the making of this episode into the context of the times. And you're talking 1967, you're talking about civil rights in Vietnam and the Cold War, and the 6-Day War. Unbelievable.
Would you like to get into the show?
Not a moment too soon, my friend.
Well, this is, you know what's funny? We talked about it. It was like, man, Star Trek's a relief.
It sure is.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we start in a teaser and we meet a new lieutenant.
Here's the report on Pollux IV, Captain.
Lieutenant Carolyn Palamas. She is played by Leslie Parrish. She was a Golden Globe nominee for Most Promising Newcomer for the 1963 movie For Love or Money. On TV, she was on shows like Perry Mason, The Wild Wild West, Batman, The Lieutenant, and Mannix. And I'm going to come back to her performance in Mannix a little bit later on. On film, she was in movies like Little Abner and the classic film The Manchurian Candidate. But when we see her, we are on the bridge. This is day one of filming for Who Mourns for Adonais. And cinematographer Jerry Finnerman was out sick for 2 days.
Oh.
So if you pay close attention to the lighting on the bridge, it is a little different. It's much more lit,
right?
Than more so than Finnerman, with his use of the different colors and the shadows. And but the cinematographer filling in for Jerry Finnerman on those 2 days, his name is Arch Dalzell, and he was the cinematographer on 1960's Little Shop of Horrors. He took Jerry Finnerman's place for a couple of days.
Wow, the original Little Shop of Horrors.
The original, yes.
Is Jack Nicholson in that?
Yes, he is.
I thought he was. And what we find out is we're exploring what sounds like a pretty boring area of space. One of the planets is Pollux IV, and obviously that's connected to Castor and Pollux, the mythological twins.
There you go. A little bit of a hint.
A little bit of a hint. And who is there talking to Lieutenant Palamas but Scotty?
Well, I was up all night working on this report, sir.
Well, in that case, there's nothing like a wee bit of coffee to get you back in shape. Join me, Carolyn?
Scotty kind of has a thing for Palamas, doesn't he?
Kirk and McCoy are giving him a little shade. They're kind of making some jokes about it.
Could you get that excited over a cup of coffee?
Well, even from here, I can tell his pulse rate's up.
And I love Scotty's...
Gentlemen.
McCoy is expressing some concern, and, Kirk looks over and says,
Why, boy? Scotty's a good man.
And he thinks he's the right man for her, but I'm not sure she thinks he's the right man.
So basically, McCoy tells Kirk, you know what? She's just not that into him.
That's exactly what happens. And then we get a totally sexist
yeah.
thing. And it's just, it's so funny when the kind of just, this is how they looked at the world reveals, again, it's a different framing because Kirk says...
I like to think of it not so much as losing an officer as gaining... Actually, I'm losing an officer.
Yeah.
Because women get married. They're not going to continue on their careers.
But McCoy initiates that part of the conversation when he says, she's a woman, all woman. One day she'll find the right man and leave the service. And I just was rewatching this episode, and I've heard that line a million times when I've watched it over the decades. And I didn't think much of it, but of course now I do, especially in today's day and age I do. And I go, why does she have to leave the service? I mean, it is a very, very dated comment, but it is a reflection of the times in which the episode was made. So, so there you go with that. But the thing is that...
I have a question before it just occurred to me, and maybe you know the answer to it, and I'm sure that somebody listening knows the answer to it. What is the highest ranking female officer in the original series?
Oh, that is a great question. The highest ranking female officer. So you got to take Commissioner Hedford from Metamorphosis because she's not an officer.
She's not an officer.
Let's see. It's got to be, Uhura.
She's a lieutenant.
She's a lieutenant.
We see, and so is Palamas. We see several lieutenants.
Yeah, but the reason I say Uhura is because of this. Because in the animated series episode,
she takes over the bridge.
The Lorelei Signal, she takes command of the Enterprise. And that's something that even someone like Palamas, Lieutenant Marla MacGyver's, I think most of the lieutenants that we've seen, not including like the yeoman, like Rand and all the other yeoman fill-ins after Rand was written out of the show. But I would say it's got to be Uhura because she can actually take command. And she did actually take command of the Enterprise in an episode that is canon.
And we don't see any commanders or commodores or admirals.
Not female. Not in the original series.
Yeah, interesting.
But you sure will in all the other shows.
So we get to the other ones.
But in earlier versions of the story, Lieutenant Palamas, she had been involved with another crew member named Sam Holloway, and that character died. So in the original version of the teaser, the episode opened with the funeral of this character, Sam Holloway. And Scotty, as it turns out, was like the rebound guy for Lieutenant Palamas.
I'm glad we didn't do that.
Yeah, I'm glad we did not go there. But what I like about this part of the second season, the beginning of the second season, and I've said this many times, that just that, you know, you're working with a producer like Gene Kuhn, you're working with revolving directors like Mark Daniels and Joseph Pevney, and of course Ralph Sinetsky, you know, directors who really, really knew Star Trek, knew the rhythms, the characters knew who they were, Shatner, Nimoy, D. Kelly, and the rhythm, the camaraderie, the chemistry between everybody is very, very evident in an episode that I feel like is not just about the big three. It is a true acting ensemble for every major character, all seven, the big seven from the original series.
Agreed. And we're heading into standard orbit. And who is sitting at the navigator seat but Chekhov? Is this his first time there?
This is Chekhov's first time in the navigator seat. He's not taking the science station like he did in Cat's Paw or in Friday's Child. He's actually sitting in the navigator's chair, so he has been promoted. And what I like about this episode, Steve, and this is something that one of the many things, as we'll get into, that I discovered, or that I realized, rather, watching Who Mourns for Adonais. You know, the mission of the Enterprise is to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations. But how many times did they actually do that? If you look at the episodes, how many times were they really out in deep space where no one had gone before, really exploring, not transferring vital materials to another planet, not responding to a distress call, not going to a space station, you know, like really exploring, doing what their actual mission was. Very, very few. This episode, they are actually out exploring, mapping. They are way out there, as we will discover, because when the things really hit the fan,
there's no one's coming to help.
No one's going to come and help them. Right. They are off the beaten path in a very big way. And I love that this is an episode that really does live up to the mission.
And the experience of the mission at this point is pretty darn boring because they don't have anything that they're finding until Sulu says,
Captain?
And they all look up and we see a big green hand.
A big green hand in deep space approaching the Enterprise. Now, this is an episode where I have to say, Steve, you know, we talked about how there are certain episodes that are actually improved by the new visual effects. This episode, Who Mourns for Adonais, I think is just fine in its original version.
It's pretty much the same.
The original effects are absolutely superb, just as good as the ones that were done in the 21st century. The visual effects for this episode by Effects Unlimited, I just think that the scene of the hand approaching the Enterprise is more effective in the original version than in the remastered version, because in the remastered version, you have the hand approaching from the planet, whereas in the original version, all you see in the center of the screen
is the hand
getting bigger and bigger, and it looks more scary.
I think the whole hand thing is kind of cheesy, regardless of the effects. I think the idea, it just, I don't know, it's not a thing I'm a fan of, but it is what it is, you know. And first they're going like, well, is this really a hand? It's like, no, it's a big field of energy, and they're trying to get away from it. They can't get away from it, and I love the moment where they go,
It's almost as if it means to grab us.
And they try to reverse their engines, but nope, the big hand grabs them.
And there's the jolt, that famous jolt, everybody flying across the bridge.
We're dead still, Captain. Helm doesn't answer. We can't move.
And the sting is on Kirk and Spock with a great musical sting by Fred Steiner. That is a classic. It is a classic teaser for Star Trek, just representing like why the teasers for the original series are still the best teasers of any Star Trek series.
After the titles, we're back and we're trying to figure out how to get away. Kirk tells Sulu to try rocking back and forth, you know, like you do when you're stuck in the mud or something, you know. We go, hey, let's try the tractor beam. No, that's not going to work.
Well, the title for this episode, Who Mourns for Adonais, like you touched on, Steve, Adonai is the Hebrew word for God. Adonis is a Greek god of beauty, the Greek god of beauty. But where does this title, Who Mourns for Adonais, come from? Well, in 1821, English poet Percy Shelley combined the words and wrote Adonais, an elegy on the death of John Keats. And line 415 of that poem reads, Who Mourns for Adonais. That's where the title came from. This scene in particular right now was shot on day 2 of filming for Who Mourns for Adonais. That means it was shot on June 1st, 1967. Now, in the last episode, Friday's Child, we talked about how at the end of May, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was released. So while they were filming this scene on the bridge, William Shatner is thinking to himself, during my lunch break, I'm going to the record store and I'm buying Sgt. Pepper.
It's so funny because I never, until doing this show with you, I never put the 6 Days War with Sgt. Pepper.
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
Gosh, yeah.
Like this, I knew they can't. You know, I might have known they happen around the same time, but I never thought about you're switching radio stations and you go from news about what's happening on the Sinai Peninsula, and you go, I don't feel like listening to this, and now you're in A Day in the Life.
You're with a little help from my friends. It's really, really incredible. And we talk so much about the current events and everything, and how so now we're into the summer of love. We're really into the turn on, tune in, and drop out time, flower power, but. In the rest of the world, in the Sinai Peninsula, civil rights and Vietnam, it was anything but a summer of love.
Well, I mean, but, part of the flower power is the peace movement. I mean, it is a reaction to the things that are going on in the world.
Absolutely, it is, yes.
And now we hear something else is coming in on our sensors, and on screen we see a dude's face.
And from the moment he starts to talk, he's clearly not like the rest of us, because there is a little bit of a echo and a reverb in his voice.
The eons have passed, and what has been written has come about. You are most welcome, my beloved children. Your places await you.
Now, even though his name has not been announced yet, this is Apollo, the great god Apollo, played by Michael Forrest. Michael Forrest was an amateur boxer. He, to this day, and through the years, has been a very, very busy voiceover actor. On TV, you could have seen him in shows like The Adventures of Rin Tin Tin, Maverick, The Outer Limits, The Twilight Zone, Gunsmoke, and Bonanza. In the 60s, he was in the film Death Watch with Leonard Nimoy, and this is actually really cool. For those of you who watch the fan-made Star Trek episodes from like Star Trek Phase 2, Star Trek The New Voyages, and of course Star Trek Continues. For the Star Trek Continues episode, Pilgrim of Eternity, Michael Forrest reprised his role as Apollo.
Oh, wow.
And this episode is absolutely fantastic. All you got to do is go to YouTube and look up Star Trek Continues, and you can watch this episode for free. And it is absolutely fantastic. Again, Michael Forrest, another great performance. And according to Michael Forrest himself, he was not the first choice to play Apollo. Wait till you hear who the producers wanted and try to imagine this actor playing Apollo. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
John Voight.
What?
Yes.
I was thinking through like big muscular guys, and where's John Voight's career? It's 67.
So it's before Midnight
Cowboy.
But it's like right before Midnight Cowboy, because they would have filmed that in 68. It was released in 69 as the only X-rated movie to
How
win
would
Best
John
Picture.
Voight play this like super method guy?
Yeah, he would have been like, "Don't call me John, call me Apollo." But no, I think that they lucked out with Michael Forrest.
I do too.
He crushed it.
Well, and he's a big muscular dude. Not everyone could pull off that toga, particularly in the 60s.
Particularly after shaving his chest.
That's true. Is that, I mean, one of the things is somebody sort of discovered and talked about in the Cinephiles is like, really, abs did not exist until Bruce Lee and then Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, yes, of course, people had abs, but the expectation of what a dude looked like when they took their shirt off, today, if you're going to take your shirt off on screen, you're doing some serious training, and the expectation is you have muscles. If you look at, with the exception of like Kirk Douglas, who was really in great shape, but you look at most actors, they were just normal. This guy looks real good.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. And like I said, the echo in his voice. I mean, and then again another great motif played by Fred Steiner, establishing a sort of godlike presence. And Kirk is really bold from this point. Like, who do you think you are?
They definitely are not communicating.
Get your hands off my ship.
Because Kirk is just like, down to earth, talking like he talks as the captain, introduces himself, and this guy is talking in a completely different way.
Are you responsible for stopping the ship?
Yes. I caused the wind to withdraw from your sails.
So give it back and then we'll talk.
And I think we get right away what this guy is supposed to be, or what he is saying he is.
It has been 5,000 years. Have you learned no patience in that time?
And you're right. Kirk is belligerent and goes right to threats.
I don't know who or what you are, but I must warn you, we have the power to defend ourselves. If you value your safety, release this ship.
But he has no idea who he's messing with yet until he literally feels the grip of Apollo on the Enterprise.
You will obey me, lest I close my hand, thus.
And he starts to put pressure on the Enterprise.
External pressure building up, Captain. 800 GSC and climbing.
And the pressure internally is becoming too much for the crew to bear. And Kirk even says, all right, you win.
I like, too, by the way, that he compares Kirk to Agamemnon, Hector, and Odysseus.
Why?
Why do I like it?
Yeah.
Well, because it immediately goes like, okay, this guy knows something about... And what's interesting is what... And this is something we'll discuss in detail later on, but what this guy is saying is those stories you read in the Iliad or in Sophocles, or those are real.
Yeah.
Those are all real people. And which, of course... I think the crew of the Enterprise thinks like you and I would think that these are myths. Maybe they're based on some kinds of reality, but they're myths.
Right. But that's one of the things that this episode really goes to is, I just thought the Greek gods, that didn't happen. Or, maybe they were just, worshiping false, maybe not false, but where did those ideas come from? They didn't just make them up. And that's what this episode says. Oh, they didn't make them up. But we'll get to that.
Captain Kirk, I invite you and your officers to join me.
Except for Spock.
But do not bring that one. The one with the pointed ears. He is much like Pan, and Pan always bored me.
So, just getting a little ahead of ourselves for the sake of a question that I'm going to ask you right now.
Okay.
Let's just say that Apollo got what he wanted. And he got the entire crew of the Enterprise to beam down and worship him. What would Apollo have done with Mr. Spock?
That is a great question. I hadn't thought about it. That is a really good question. I think he would have killed him.
He would have killed him.
Yeah.
He would have absolutely killed him. Because he's saying, don't bring him down.
Yeah.
And if he's saying already, I don't want you can all come down except that one, then he there's no way that this would have ended well for Spock in any way.
Well, and Spock is never going to worship him.
Right.
Never.
Absolutely not.
Never would do it.
And why? Because Spock does not believe in power without a constructive purpose.
There you go.
And I'm going to come back to that episode.
Okay.
Too.
Well, no, there's definitely a connection there. But it's interesting too that he compares him to Pan, which Spock is nothing like Pan. I mean, Pan is the god of music and sex, and but Pan and Apollo definitely did have some conflicts. Pan challenged Apollo to a duel of music. It's like the devil goes down to Georgia, and they have another god to be the judge, and Pan plays his lyre first, and the judge goes, "Whoa, that is really good." And then Apollo plays one chord on the lyre, and the judge goes, "Nope, you win." And Pan loses the battle.
But Apollo says, Pan always bored me.
Yeah.
So
which he's not boring. You could say a lot of things about Pan, but that guy was not boring, I don't think.
Well, so at this point, Kirk feels like he has no choice but to beam down.
Yep.
And Spock is going to stay in command in the Enterprise.
Insulted, Spock?
Insults are effective only where emotion is present.
We'll tackle them together.
I love that moment so much, and I love it much more having done this show, because I go like, oh, you know what? The Spock we met in Where No Man Has Gone Before wouldn't be the man to find all the answers. Like, their relationship and their trust of each other and Spock's abilities have grown in the course of the show. And now he really is. I think post City on the Edge of Forever, like, their bond is deeper, much deeper than it ever was before.
You are so right. You are so right. I mean, if anything is going to bond Kirk and Spock, and of course Kirk and McCoy and Spock and McCoy, it's that incredibly epic and personal and galaxy-changing moment in sitting on the edge of forever. But also, Kirk knows that Spock is the right person to not only find the answers, but also to be in command. Because Spock has learned a lot about command since the Galileo 7.
Absolutely.
And when we see, well, as we will see throughout the course of the episode, as we cut back to the Enterprise, Spock in command.
He's great.
He's very, very different than he was.
Absolutely.
Especially in the way that he talks to the crew.
Yep. We beam down, and it is Kirk, Scotty, McCoy, Chekhov, and Lieutenant Palamas.
Now, originally, Spock was going to be part of the landing party, and Sulu was going to be in command. Gene Kuhn decided, no, I'm going to leave Spock behind on the Enterprise. So Spock's lines were given to Chekhov, and Sulu's lines were given to Spock.
Interesting.
Very interesting. I mean, of course, they made other
Of course, they rewrote them and changed them, yeah.
Sure. Again, it's a beautiful score. I always loved that image and hearing the music when you see these 5 people beaming down, and they walk over, and you see Apollo sitting on his throne at the temple. This was done on day 3. This is the first time filming on stage 10 for the Manolepa set, which of course was designed by set designer Matt Jeffries.
So what's about to happen is, I really like things in terms of screenwriting where one character is doing one set of things and the other characters are doing a completely different set of things. So he is welcoming them all in his godlike way to this pastoral environment where they're going to live the rest of their lives as shepherds and whatever. And they are doing their Star Trek job of trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And Kirk is asking questions.
You know of Earth? You've been there?
Search your most distant memories. Those of the thousands of years past. And I am there. Your fathers knew me, and your fathers' fathers. I am Apollo.
I have a question, which I don't necessarily expect an answer. Why'd they pick Apollo? Why isn't it Zeus or Poseidon or Hades or Mars?
Okay.
Yeah.
That is a great question. And I actually have an answer.
Oh, awesome.
What was going on during the filming of this episode? What was...
Oh, the Apollo missions?
Bingo.
Oh, that's a good answer.
Bingo.
Good answer.
But you raise a great question. Like Zeus, like if Michael Forrest got up and said, I am Zeus... Yeah. That would have been just as effective.
And he does kind of shoot lightning bolts, which is Zeus's power.
So, but you're right. Why Apollo? Certainly, I have no idea if this was intentional when Gilbert Ralston wrote this, but the Apollo program was definitely at the forefront of certainly of the United States, especially because while this episode was being written and while it was being filmed, NASA was trying to literally pick up the ashes after the Apollo 1 fire back in January. But Apollo was very, very, very much in the news. The name was very, very well known. And it was fitting because, he's a Greek god. And this episode's about a Greek god. Just seems like a slam dunk that he is Apollo.
And I am the Tsar of all the Russias.
That's a check.
What's so amazing is how seamlessly and easily Chekhov just becomes part of the main crew.
Yeah. He really... It is a testament to Walter Koenig's acting and his abilities and his chemistry that he fit right in. He fit right in such a way that it's easy to forget that he was missing for the entire first season.
It really is. And what's funny is it's not like there are other characters who recurred a bunch, like Kyle and Leslie and DeSalle, and none of them just fit in.
Oh, he fits in perfectly. And even with that wig, he fits in.
And part of it is... they give him jokes. Giving a kind of bit supporting character, you don't generally give them a joke because Shatner wants the joke. You know what I mean? But they give him jokes and it makes him, and the other thing about him making jokes, it shows how comfortable he is with this group of people.
Absolutely. And when you're watching Catspaw, and especially Friday's Child, and now Who Mourns for Adonais, and even the next episode, Amok Time, like you said, they're building Chekhov to be a really special character for the first part of Chekhov's time on the Enterprise when we actually see him, because we have established that Chekhov was on the Enterprise during space seed, even though
that's scientifically proven.
Yeah, so we have proven that. But like, I like how he's like a Spock in training. Like, he's trying so hard to give his captain so much information that he's prepared. He's really done a lot of his research, and he's a kid. He's 22 years old, and he keeps he's very, very proud of his Russian heritage, to the point where he's rewriting his own history about it. But by the end of the second season, after Gene Kuhn had left, the development of his character kind of falls by the wayside.
Right.
You see episodes like Spectre of the Gun and The Way to Eden, where Chekhov is very, very much featured.
Central, yeah.
But I feel like the character that they were building him up to be, some of that was, they kind of let it go.
Right. And one key moment is he apologizes to Kirk and says,
I'm sorry, Captain. I never met a god before.
And you haven't yet.
That one little line, which sounds like it could be a throwaway line, is key to where Kirk stands. And he'll say this later on about the concept of gods.
yeah, but we're going to definitely have to discuss that because there's a lot coming up. And then Apollo sees Lieutenant Palamas. To say he has a reaction is an understatement.
Yes. All right. So I'm debating whether or not I should get into this now.
Okay.
Or a little bit later. But okay. So while Kirk and Apollo are talking, McCoy is taking readings. Mm-hmm. And he says, simple humanoid.
Right.
So he's a simple humanoid. And Kirk says, evidently not so simple.
Right.
So here you have a humanoid, who is displaying great powers. And as we will discover, he is displaying these powers not because they are coming completely from within, although they kind of are, but through a nearby device. So, okay, not the first time we've seen this.
Right.
We have seen the likes of Apollo in its basic, most bare, in the barest sense, with Trelane in The Squire of Gothos, and again with Korop and Sylvia in Cat's Paw. And we are also, as we will discover, that Apollo just wants people around.
Yes.
Just like Trelane did. Now, Trelane was a spoiled brat who was saw them as toys, whereas Apollo is extremely entitled. After thousands of years of going without the worship, he wants that worship back. He misses it. But, so, like you said, he instantly takes a liking to Palamas. So, what does that remind you of?
Space Seed.
Yes, sir.
This is structurally very similar to Space Seed.
Very similar to Space Seed. And it never hit me until rewatching this episode. But I feel like a broken record when I say that.
No, I had the same thing. I never had the Space Seed thought until I was rewatching it a couple of days ago.
But basically, Palamas is Lieutenant Mara MacGyver's, isn't she? Well,
and they're both experts in history. She's an archaeologist. You know, I don't know quite why these people are on the Enterprise, but and here someone comes out of what they're obsessed with. You know,
they are seeing, MacGyver's in Space Seed and Palamas in Who Mourns for Adonais. They are seeing perfect physical representations of their expertise. And both of them immediately become smitten by them.
Yep.
Now, we talked about on Space Seed how MacGyver's was kind of unlikable, that she wasn't right for the Enterprise, how...
she wasn't happy there.
She wasn't happy there, right. But how do you see MacGyver's and Palamas being different?
Well, first of all, we don't have those clues that she's not happy there. We don't have a lot of her character.
Exactly.
I think her character comes out a bit later.
Yeah.
I think she's actually not that good in the very first scene on the bridge, like in terms of her acting. And I kind of went, oh, is she not going to be good in this episode? As I was just watching it. She actually, I think, is better, much better later on.
I agree.
What is it you want?
You will worship me.
If you want to play God and call yourself Apollo, that's your business. But you're no God to us, mister.
I said you would worship me.
And you've got a lot to learn.
And so have you. Let the lesson begin.
And I love that they start with the shot of our crew, who start looking up as we hear this big music cue before we cut to that Apollo has become a giant.
Welcome to Olympus, Captain Kirk.
It's a great moment, and the music cue is by Fred Steiner.
It's great. It's a really good music cue.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What a great way to end Act 1.
It's great.
Ah.
It's great. Act 2, we're back on the Enterprise. Uhura can't contact the landing party. And who do we have back on the bridge? Or maybe it's his first time on the bridge, is Kyle.
Okay, this is not, this is not the first time we're seeing Kyle, but you're right, this is Kyle's first time on the bridge in an episode that was produced, not going in air date order, but this is the first time that we were hearing his name. So that is obviously John
really?
Winston. Yeah, the first time he is referred to by name, but Spock is now in command, and he's really forceful.
Lieutenant Kyle, I want a complete sensor scan of the planet.
Aye, sir.
Locate all life forms. I want to know what's going on down there.
And then we're back on the planet, and giant Apollo disappears.
Coin a phrase. Fascinating.
It's perfect for McCoy to actually invoke Spock. It's an awesome moment.
And I like that we asked McCoy, what he got from his readings, and he says, well, I can't say much until I check out these readings.
He looks human, but of course that doesn't mean a thing.
Because we've met a whole bunch of people that look human, who are not human.
Whatever he is, sir, he seems to control a remarkable technology.
Power is what he controls. You can't do tricks like that without energy.
Fine, but what power and where is it? Scout around with your tricorders. Find the source of that power.
So that's really what it hit me, that okay, so maybe Apollo wasn't that far removed from Trelane and Korob and Sylvia.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting is I think we can now create like a bit of a hierarchy of, there are a lot of civilizations that are more powerful than us. There's ones that are more powerful than us, but are still humanoid, like the Telosians, like the people who run the Shoreleaf planet. They're ones who are way more powerful and do have godlike powers, but they need machines like Apollo, Trelane, and Korob and Sylvia. And then there's ones that have transcended human bodies and have powers themselves.
Like the Organians.
Like the Organians and the Charlie X people.
Yep, the Phaeacians.
And the Q, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the Q.
Bones, I wonder if 5,000 years ago... I have an idea. What if he is really Apollo?
Why?
But then Apollo comes back.
I want from you that which is rightfully mine. Your loyalty, your tribute, and your worship.
So entitled, much more so than Trelane.
I don't think it's just entitled. I think we show this later on, I think to some degree his powers come from worship. Oh. I think, which I was going to bring up later, but I think another connector is that we meet a bunch of creatures throughout Star Trek that feed off emotion in one way or another, where it's Wolf in the Fold or Day of the Dove, because I think what he talks about is that the gods kind of left when people didn't have time for them anymore.
Oh my God, you're right. Steve, you're right. You're right. Because we see when that rejection finally ultimately happens to Apollo, he even though of course they've gotten away with his power source by that point, but I never considered that Apollo needed the adoration for sustenance.
Well, and again it's at the end, but if he didn't, then Spock destroying the power source with his phasers, that would have been enough. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have had to have Lieutenant Palamas reject him. But you do have to have that,
right?
Because that is part of his powers.
Wow, absolutely, you're absolutely right.
May I ask what you offer in exchange for this worship?
Life in paradise, as simple and as pleasurable as it was those thousands of years ago on that beautiful planet so far away.
I don't actually think that life in ancient Greece was just simple and pleasurable. I think it was probably pretty difficult and brutal, actually. And if you read the Greek myths, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of disasters and horribleness. Like the idea that the Greek gods made everything cool for everybody is definitely not what happens in those myths.
Yeah, he's definitely romanticizing the past.
We're willing to talk, but you'll find we don't bow to every creature who happens to have a bag of tricks.
I do think, it's not for the episode, but in terms of Kirk, of going like, hey, dude, listen, can we back it up a little bit and just have a conversation? Like maybe there was a way.
Yeah, he was very aggressive.
Very aggressive.
This is where I think Gene Kuhn really changed the dynamic of Kirk from the one that was really established by Roddenberry.
Yeah.
Roddenberry's Kirk was more of an explorer, and he saw command as almost like a burden, whereas Kuhn's version of Kirk was more, he was a soldier.
Yeah, a little bit more.
Agamemnon was one such as you, and Hercules. Pride and arrogance. They defied me until they felt my wrath.
I would like to point out that we are quite capable of some wrath ourselves.
I like that.
Kirk says, I have 430 people on that ship up there.
No, you do not, Captain. They are mine. To save, to cherish, or to destroy at my will.
But then Palamas steps in and she questions Apollo.
Why?
Now, we saw Apollo notice Palamas, but now he is noticing her for something else, her demeanor, her strength. But what he says to her is really sexist.
You seem wise for a woman.
Yes, definitely sexist.
Very, very sexist.
Which, by the way, I don't have a problem with characters being sexist. Like, he is from the world of Greece 5,000 years ago. That culture was like that.
Well, that's true.
I have a problem with Kirk being sexist in the 23rd century. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, yeah. Like what they said on the bridge about her leaving to get married. But you know, Apollo, you know, it's from 5,000 years ago. That's the way.
Well, different cultures are different. You know, that's okay. I also, by the way, he says you are like Aphrodite and Athena. There couldn't be more two different people than Aphrodite and Athena. And boy, when he touches her face, we cut to Scotty. He is not pleased, which is a great setup. We know where this thing is going to go.
What is your name?
Lieutenant Palamas.
I mean your name.
Carolyn.
This is the MacGyver's moment with Khan.
Totally.
This is so instead of being in sickbay between MacGyver's and Khan, you know, we're on Pollux IV between Palamas and Apollo, and just so quickly we're seeing just her become so smitten with Apollo, so weak in the knees to the extent. So you're right. As far as Scotty goes, we are definitely seeing where this is going to go for basically the rest of the episode with Scotty. I gotta say, I don't like Scotty in this episode. He's too much of a hothead. His after seeing him make so many great decisions and really prove that he is worthy of a command of his own on the Enterprise after episodes like A Taste of Armageddon and the way he really took command in Friday's Child. Like, he's completely, like, almost like unhinged, not thinking rationally, not using good judgment at all.
So I 100% agree. I also think, you know, I think if you look at, we'll see when we get to these later episodes, is that Scotty, as we said many times, the most solid, the most military, the most dependable, the most, you know, like methodical person on the Enterprise, he cannot handle the ladies.
Yeah.
Because Wolf in the Fold and
Lights of Zetar.
Yeah. Like, as soon as there's a woman involved, Scotty is just he just can't handle it. He's like completely gone.
Yeah,
he's
like
good
mush.
in his engine room with his technical manuals.
And he's good on the bridge when Kirk and Spock aren't around.
Drinks on Alien under the table, no problem. Pretty girl comes along. Sorry, peace out.
Yeah, they did not do a good job of but to that extent, Steve, they're adding a dynamic. They've added a dynamic to his character that makes him vulnerable, and that vulnerability is a pretty woman.
But I do definitely think they take it too far.
Leave her alone.
You protest? You risk much.
And so do you.
And he draws his phaser.
Yeah.
He draws. So here's the thing. So Jamie Doohan lost his finger in D-Day.
Yeah.
So he draws his phaser. Apollo shoots him with the lightning bolt.
Yeah.
And James Doohan, Scotty, kneels in pain, holding his hand. And we see what happened to the phaser. It's completely mangled.
Yeah.
Melted. So that would have actually been a really good moment
To show the finger missing?
to show that Scotty has lost his finger.
Yeah. Not a network TV in 1967
Oh yeah, that's
thing
true.
we're going to do.
They would have been like, no.
Yeah, I mean, that because you're going to see, I mean, that
would have been
dismembered
gruesome.
finger, that's like a lot.
Yeah.
And Chekhov tries to fire. It won't. The phaser is melted.
None of your toys will function.
And he immediately turns back to Lieutenant Palamas and says,
Where were we?
yeah, exactly. He says,
Yes, you are a beauty. But like Artemis, the bow arm should be bare.
and now she's in the pink dress.
That pink dress. Wow.
It is stunning. She looks stunning in it. Again, I go, Is there anyone else that's having outfits as revealing as? I mean, this is clearly glued on, this fabric.
I'm glad you said that because it actually was glued on. It absolutely was. And I mentioned when I was going through Leslie Parrish's TV credits, I said I would come back to Mannix. Well, in a 1968 episode of Mannix entitled "The Girl in the Frame," Leslie Parrish was on that episode, which was also a Desilu production, like Star Trek, and she wore that dress.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow,
yes,
that's
you
interesting.
can find pictures of it online. Just Google Leslie Parrish, Star Trek, Mannix, and you'll see the dress.
That's hilarious. The other thing is, this is Space Seed. Why do you wear your hair up?
Oh my gosh, you're right. This is Apollo's moment of saying, but that's not attractive.
Yeah. Is it that you shouldn't be in like work outfits?
Oh my gosh.
Women should be sexy.
You are absolutely right. And Bill Tice, you talk about the revealing outfits in Star Trek. Look at Sherry Jackson and What Are Little Girls Made Of? And obviously Leslie Parrish now. Angelique Pettyjohn in the Games of the Triskelion. The mini skirts that all the female crew members wore. So Bill Tice was the costume designer for the original series. And, and also Roddenberry wanted the women to show as much bare skin as possible.
Yep.
And he got his wish as producer.
I think everyone listening can know why some of these choices might be problematic, and also know why we as young boys liked him.
Yep.
And her reaction to that dress is,
Oh, it's beautiful.
Which I do not think that makes sense. I think she should have had a whoa reaction.
She absolutely should have.
Yeah.
She should have said, no, I want my uniform back, please.
And he says, come on with me. And Scotty, he's going to get his ass kicked in this episode.
Yeah, he really
is. She's not going with you.
Runs after him and takes a big shot and goes flying over the table.
This stunt was filmed on day 4 of the production for Who Mourns for Adonais. So the stuntman is Jay Jones. And that scene where Apollo throws Scotty back and he goes flying over the table, Jay Jones filmed that scene. And he was knocked out cold. And they had to rush him to the hospital. But watching the dailies, the producers thought, I think we need to do this again. But Jay Jones was injured and couldn't do it. So James Doohan said, I will do it.
Oh, wow.
So James Doohan insisted that he could do it. He filmed the stunt.
Wow.
But then when they were going through the dailies of both versions, the producers ultimately decided that the Jay Jones version was better. So that's what you see.
That is fascinating.
Interesting, huh?
In many, many ways.
Come.
It's all right, Captain. I'll go.
Yeah, sure she will.
Yeah. And they walk off hand in hand and disappear. There's a little bump in the plate, by the way, which means that the camera, they try to lock it down, and somebody walked by and just tapped it, and it moved a tiny degree. And that's why you see that bump.
Stunned, but coming around. I'm not sure it's wise to let her go off like that.
He would have been rather difficult to stop.
Yeah.
Scotty's okay. He's tingling all over. And immediately when he hears that she's gone, he's immediately like, we got to go get her. Like, Scotty he's off.
Yeah. That's what I mean. That's like, come on, get a grip, Scotty. And Kirk basically tells him to get a grip.
I understand your concern over her, but you volunteered to go with him. Hopefully to find out more about him. She's doing her job. I think it's about time you started doing yours. We've got to find out the source of his power. You've got to try, Cora. Use it if you're able to.
Shatner plays this scene perfectly because the tone shifts. You hear him getting mad.
Yeah.
And one more thing. I want no more unauthorized action against Apollo or whatever he is. That's an order.
Aye, aye, sir.
And then he shifts back.
Besides, you stiff-necked thistlehead, you could have gotten yourself killed.
Like, Shatner plays this moment so perfectly, the way he shifts the tone from being, orderly to angry to concerned about his friend.
Yeah. And it's so out of character because you think about, like, Scotty is calmly draining phasers while they're being attacked by animals in the Galileo 7. And then when Spock shoots off the boosters and ignites them, he goes, distress signal. Like, he is in so many episodes, he is just calmly, whatever's going on, he's focused on the job. Even like City on the Edge of Forever. Hey, if we don't come back, you're going to have to go back in time and save the galaxy. And Scotty goes, aye.
Right.
You know, like he is the calmest guy.
But that's not who we're seeing.
Well, that's not this guy.
Yeah,
here.
it's just over the top.
Scotty doesn't believe in gods.
Follows no God.
So I want to just talk briefly about this. So I think because we grew up in a basically monotheistic dominated world, our image of what God is God, is this all powerful, completely divorced from human reality kind of thing.
Right.
That's not what the polytheistic gods are like. And it's funny, I read a book years ago, it's called God, a Biography. It's by a guy named Jack Miles, who's like a Jesuit religious scholar. And the idea of the book was just to imagine God as a real character and track his biography. And one of the things he talks about is that in the Old Testament, it's all through the Old Testament, that the God that appears is probably based on a bunch of other myths from a bunch of other places. And so his character shifts. And so there's the God in Genesis who says, let there be light. That's kind of the all-powerful.
Sure.
But the God that shows up in the Sodom and Gomorrah story or talks to Abraham, or the God that's in the Garden of Eden talking to Eve, that's more like a dude. And, who has like jealousies and personalities and limitations. The Greek gods, they're not like God. They are very, very human with emotions and desires and flaws and vulnerabilities, and so that whole conception of what a god is just different.
They also have unique powers.
Yes,
like almost like they are
specific unique powers.
Superheroes to an extent.
Exactly.
Follows no God. But he could have been taken for one, though. Once.
This next conversation is a perfect example of what makes Star Trek so great. A genuinely thought-provoking conversation.
Say 5,000 years ago, a highly sophisticated group of space travelers landed on Earth around the Mediterranean.
And McCoy definitely picks up right away and has that epiphany and is now with Kirk.
Yes. To the simple shepherds and tribesmen of early Greece, creatures like that would have been gods.
Especially if they had the power to alter their form at will and command great energy. In fact, they couldn't have been taken for anything else.
It is a theory that makes going out of Star Trek, just getting back into the real world, makes total sense.
Yes, I think it 100% does.
But
okay, are they the same people who were the Norse gods, or the same people who we read about in the Bhagavad Gita, or in African gods or Native American gods? Are these different groups of aliens that visited in different places?
That's a great point. That is a great point. Well, in the sake of this conversation, you're talking about the Greek gods. You're talking about the gods around the Mediterranean. He doesn't go off on a...
No, of course. And this is because this brings up what I wanted to bring up, which is that, there's a word that comes up a lot. I don't think about it that much, but the word is canon. That's these certain things are canon and certain things are not canon. So if it was in, the original series, well, that's canon. If it was in some comic book, maybe it's not canon. And I don't pay attention to it all that much, but I have to ask this question. Are we saying that in the Star Trek universe, it is canon that the Greek myths are facts?
In the Star Trek universe, we are exploring the possibility in a deeper way without confirming them.
I think this episode says they are fact. We'll wait till we get a little further, but I think Kirk says, no, that's what happened.
Listen, if you really think about it, what Kirk is saying makes a whole lot of sense. When you get to the end of the episode, even after just the comparisons to Trelane and Korab and Sylvia with having a device that enhances his powers or gives him just such a big source of power, you take that away, the final moment feels very godlike to me.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe Kirk is wrong. Maybe they were gods. I just think that...
Well, what's a god, though?
But Kirk, well, like Kirk says, someone who can command great powers. And so, but to Kirk, Apollo is not a god. But what he's saying is, 5,000 years ago, when the human race was more primitive and more tribal, then those kinds of beings would be so far and above that they would be considered gods. but humanity has evolved. Their intelligence, their ideas, and certainly their technology and their potential has evolved in such a way that they've risen a little bit further than they were 5,000 years ago. The gap has closed. Not completely. There's still a very big gap between, obviously, the Captain Kirk and Apollo, but it's a little bit closer. So I don't think that this episode is saying for sure that the Greek gods, they weren't really gods, that they were aliens. What I'm saying is that this episode just brings about the possibility,
sure,
a very strong possibility supported by a very plausible theory that maybe they were aliens. Maybe.
Okay, so I think that's all absolutely true, and I agree with it. And I don't think the episode says definitively what it is. It's funny, you reminded me, and I had to go look it up, the famous Arthur C. Clarke quote, which is, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." Which is that, so you're in ancient Greece and these people come along that have all these powers. Well, that's magic. It's not science.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas for them, it might be science. Is that what occurred to me as you were speaking is a god something that is defined like a lion? A lion is a lion. A god is a god. Or is a god a label put on a more powerful being by a less powerful being? In other words, is it a way that we talk about something? Because, and I always think about this in Marvel Comics. So Thor and Loki, they're gods. But there are a bunch of people just as powerful as them that we do not call gods. Are they gods because they are immortal? Like, what do we mean? Like, in the monotheistic world, when we say God, we mean the omnipotent, omnipresent, powerful creator of everything.
Which Kirk refers to.
Yes, well, we're going to get to that. But when you say gods, like Zeus and Hera and Thor and Odin and all those, we're not saying that. We're saying something else. So are we just saying that a god is a way more powerful creature, and therefore is Q a god?
Here is the answer to your question.
Yes.
Or here's my answer to your question. I would love to hear everyone else's answer to this question on our Facebook page to plug Enterprise Insights. But, Steve, that is why God is spelled with a capital G. And gods is a lowercase.
Okay.
So that label is a lion has a lowercase l. Mm-hmm. If it was the lion, a deity, mm-hmm. like the god that you are referring to, it would have been with a capital L. But for in the case
so these are different words, essentially.
It is absolutely a different word. The presence of the capital G is what makes God God, in the sense of God, God. Right. Okay. But in the sense of more powerful than us, for them to be referred to as quote unquote gods is a label. It is an identifier. It is a species of sorts. It is also the way Gary Mitchell saw himself and where no man has gone before. And Gary Mitchell, his powers were not natural. He got them. But when he got them, he did not need to rely on a power source to utilize them. To that extent, Gary Mitchell is more powerful than Apollo.
100%.
100% more than.
Great point.
But is Gary Mitchell God with a capital G? No.
He is
Does he have the
god.
powers of a god? Absolutely. So do the Thasians, for that matter. So do the Metrons.
Right.
So do the Organians. And so do Trelane and Korov and Sylvia. They have the powers of gods, but not that but they're just not identified as gods because, unlike Apollo, these other characters don't have their basis in those myths.
So I think we have sort of three things, which is one is the capital G God, which is this other thing. All powerful, a totally different thing. That is God. There's only one of them. That's it. Then we have these people that we can consider to be gods, but what makes them gods is the relative distance between our power levels, and that I can't understand yours. So, like, to Dr. Daner, Gary Mitchell is not a god. They're the same. But us looking up to him and not understanding that, we go, oh, they are gods.
Look, I mean, Gary Mitchell had powers, again, that he did not need to rely on a temple or on a transmuter or on a mirror machine. He just had those powers, and so did Daner.
Right.
But again, I just think for the sake of of labels, I think it's fair to use the word gods as a description, as a label to Apollo.
You know what else just occurred to me?
What's that?
Is that the Kirk who is being so confrontational or contradictory with Apollo is the Kirk that knew Gary Mitchell and Charlie X and met the Organians. He met a whole bunch of people like this, and Trelane.
Right. So he's almost jaded now by meeting a being with superior powers.
And with the exception of the Organians, all of these people have been flawed. Right. And mostly ones that you had to fight against.
And boy, is Apollo flawed.
Yeah.
Majorly flawed.
We're back on the Enterprise, and Sulu's going to reverse some polarity, and there's some big shakes, and no, that's not good. And Spock orders Uhura to restore communications.
Well, I'm working, sir, but I can't do anything with this.
And then I think Spock essentially pulls the Kirk move from City on the Edge of Forever and Friday's Child, which he goes,
oh.
It's totally like, oh, well, maybe that's too hard for you. I guess if you can't do it. And then Uhura goes,
well, I might be able to rig up a subspace bypass circuit.
Good, do so.
His leadership skills have gone way, way up.
Way up. And we're going to see them go up even further as this episode progresses. But so in Friday's Child, which was the episode produced right before this, which was another episode that we see all 7 cast members not just in the episode, but featured prominently in the episode. 2 back-to-back episodes where Star Trek is not just about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Star Trek is a true ensemble show. The beginning, and this is one of the reasons, Steve, why I have said repeatedly since we started doing this podcast that Star Trek hit its stride in the beginning of season 2, because we get to see a more ensemble type
Didn't you say
dynamic.
Star Trek hit its stride at the end of season 1?
Well, yeah, end of season 1, beginning of season 2. Yeah, definitely end of season 1, for sure. And again, all that after Kuhn. But when they came back for season 2, and they were using the same 3 directors, Pevney, Daniels, and Sinetsky, and they're back for another season, and Gene Kuhn is very much the showrunner now, and they got it down. They got it down, and it just must have been great for everyone, on this cast, especially Nichelle and James Doohan and Walter and George, to get these 2 back-to-back scripts where they're all so prominently featured.
Well, I think what's really happened that you just kind of clued me into. The show is great. The show is great. Period. I mean, obviously we wouldn't be doing this. I think what really hits in the beginning of season 2 is the ensemble. Is like the team is really defined and together now.
We are seeing them work as a team, just like we will see them work as a team in like Star Trek 4.
Yeah.
And Star Trek 3. So, and I think that's the Star Trek that we all love, is when we are seeing the 7 of them work together.
So Sulu calls Spock over. He's found some kind of energy source and he can't pinpoint it. And Spock says,
I would suggest, Mr. Sulu, that if you cannot find out where the power source is, you should find out where it is not. A simple process of elimination.
And I love Sulu's reaction, like,
the whole planet, sir?
And Spock looks at him and he goes,
yes, sir. The whole planet.
But it's like, how many times have we done this? How many times have we had to methodically go through a huge space because that's all we could do? It's Galileo 7, it's in Metamorphosis, it's in a bunch.
It's in the Squire of Gothos.
It's in the Squire of Gothos, that's what we got to do. And Spock looks at some weird fancy slide rule.
Yeah. Real primitive.
We're with Palamas and Apollo at a lovely little spot looking over the water, and he is putting some moves on her.
Oh, yeah. He's really charming I was going to say the pants off.
Well, that's going to be a question I'm going to ask, actually.
Yep.
We're going to get to that question.
Are you frightened of me?
Frightened? No, I don't think so. Of course, a girl doesn't go walking with
A god?
And I like her response.
All right, a god.
So that kind of is part of like your question that you just had, a god.
Well, and I think she's going, I'm not, if that's what you want to call yourself, fine.
Right, yeah.
I'm not going to argue with you.
But here's the thing. We've just seen Apollo show incredible power. He is not to be messed with. And now we are seeing Apollo as a really different person, much more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. He is very different with Palamas than he definitely is with Kirk and Scotty. But Michael Forrest, his performance, the way he is able to go from being powerful and intimidating to these moments here, and for the rest of the episode, we just see how much of a tragic figure Apollo is. I mean, really, no pun intended here, but this is he's like the ultimate Greek tragedy, a tragic figure. He's also a sad person, and he's so needy.
Yeah.
He's like a very high maintenance.
It's true.
What happened to the others? Artemis, Hera.
They returned to the cosmos. The wings of the wind.
You mean they died?
No. We're immortal, we gods. But the earth changed.
And this is the key line to me in terms of what his needs are. He says,
Our fathers changed. They turned away until we were only memories. God cannot survive as a memory. We need love, admiration, worship.
It's like if this is an episode where you have to pay attention to every word, whether it is really clarified or just like a throwaway line, like Kirk saying, Chekhov saying, I haven't met a god before. And Kirk saying, well, you haven't yet. I think this is another one. A god cannot exist as a memory. But I think that God really plays into how, even without the physical presence, the physical manifestation of their powers, a device that gives them their powers, that's not alone. That's not enough to sustain them. Apollo's been waiting 5,000 years, basically, for the Enterprise to cross its path, and he's like, okay, great. I've got my sustenance back. It is that adoration, the worship that, like you said, like other aliens, like other powerful beings, that sustains him.
Well, and there's this weird way that I think he's like the guardian of forever, in the sense that he's been out there waiting for a long, long time, and all his friends are gone. He's they're all like, they're never coming, it's over, and they all join the universe and whatever that means. And he's like, no, they'll be here. The great pumpkin will come. He will come.
Waiting. You have a powerful being waiting. And just like, I know I like the Squire of Gothos a little more than you do, but in some of these episodes that we covered since then, we've referenced Trelane and the Squire of Gothos. And in that episode, Trelane was definitely looking through a telescope at the Earth.
Oh, yeah.
Waiting. And then in this star desert, sees the Enterprise speeding by. He says, aha. And that's exactly what Apollo does here in Who Mourns for Adonais.
What's interesting to me is the vulnerability he shows, particularly in this next moment. If he had shown this vulnerability to Kirk, we might have had a totally different scenario, because she says, do you really think you're a god?
In a real sense, we were gods.
Which means that he's saying essentially, well, no, we're not gods. We were a god in the sense of our power level compared to these other people. He said,
we had the power of life and death. We could have struck out from Olympus and destroyed. We have no wish to destroy.
If he had gone to Kirk and gone, listen, I'm this alien being. We were the Greek gods on your planet, and we really like that, and I'd like to work out a deal with you again. I could be, like with a more human approach, we wouldn't have all the conflicts we end up having.
So we came home again. It was an empty place without worshippers. But we had no strength to leave. So we waited, all of us, through the long years.
But you said the others didn't die.
Even for a god, there's a point of no return.
And I like this story, the image of Hera's death, or whatever it is. She says,
she stood in front of the temple and spread herself upon the wind. Thinner and thinner, until only the wind remained.
That's great writing, by the way.
I think so, too. But he had faith in humans. He had faith that they would come.
Of all the gods I knew, and I waited for you to come sit by my side.
I don't understand.
And we're already clued into what he's talking about.
Even 5,000 years ago, the gods took mortals to them to love, to care for. Like Zeus took Leto, my mother.
Leto was not immortal. Leto was a child of the Titans, I think. So that's actually not correct, but but it's okay.
We were gods of passion, of love.
And he kisses her.
We cut back to the landing party, and again, another moment for Chekhov to shine.
Some creatures can generate and control energy with no harm to themselves. The electric eel on Earth, the giant dry worm of Antos IV, the fluffy...
Not the whole encyclopedia, Chekhov.
The captain requires complete information.
Spock's contaminating this boy, Jim.
It's so welcoming him into the family. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, we're just a few episodes into season 2, and we're like, no, this guy's, he is equal with the, not the big three, of course, but with the others.
Are you suggesting that he taps a flow of energy and channels it through his body?
That would seem most likely, sir.
Mr. Chekhov, I think you've earned your pay for the week.
I like when he says that again to Scotty in Doomsday Machine.
Yeah.
But now Apollo comes back. Where is Palamas? So Scotty,
who Kirk told, like, settle it down, dude, is not settled down, comes right at him.
You bloodthirsty Saracen, what have you done, Scotty?
Takes another big hit. Huge stunt.
This stunt and the previous one, like, even by today's standards, for a television show,
yeah,
those are incredible stunts.
Yeah. I love, by the way, when Kirk calls people Mister.
All right, mister. You wanted worshippers? You got enemies.
And
Apollo just shows his power.
It's pretty much a force choke from Darth Vader. I mean, that's pretty much what he does to him.
Absolutely, yeah. He's using the force. I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Yep.
Crossing the streams.
And that's the end of Act 2.
Great act.
Yeah.
Great ending to an act.
Yep. We're right back where we were at Act 3. Kirk can breathe again.
You will learn discipline. You will learn...
And there's a pained look on his face, and then he disappears.
And Chekhov sees it.
He is like a sort of a Spock in training, that when Apollo uses great powers, he needs to go off and recharge his energy cells, so to speak.
Where's Apollo?
He disappeared again, like the cat in that Russian story.
Don't you mean the English story, the Cheshire Cat?
Cheshire? No, sir. Minsk, perhaps.
All right.
Okay, here's the key to this. Key to the joke. Watch Chekhov after he says it. Is he smiles in a way to say, I know I'm joking.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the key, is that he is so comfortable, the lowest ranked guy, he is so comfortable making little silly jokes in a life and death situation with the captain of his ship.
Yeah, just like he did in Friday's Child.
Mm-hmm.
When he said, I know that saying, it was invented in Russia. You know, and the bridge crew looks at him and he, like, you know, smiles like, yeah, I'm just joking.
And yes, like all running gags, it runs too much, you know. It becomes like performative, I think, at a certain point, which I don't like. But in this moment, it's fun. Scotty groans and comes back too. Now his arm won't move. I mean, this guy.
What do you expect?
Yeah.
If I remember my ancient legends, the gods, after expending energy, required rest, even as we humans.
And Apollo's gone. After attacking you and Mr. Scott. You think maybe he's off somewhere recharging his energy cells?
This is where Kirk basically leans forward and says, not chess, Mr. Spock. Poker.
I would say it's also where Kirk figures out how to beat Charlie X. Is he can only control so much. He's reaching his limit.
So we're going
to overload him.
I guess going back to the Corbomite maneuver, this is Kirk taking another risk.
Yep.
It is definitely a risk because if it comes to fruition, not everyone's going to survive what he's about to pull off.
Well, and what he's essentially saying, because he says if we all come at him and we get him to attack one of us, then the others can gang up on him.
Overpower him.
And what I think he's really saying is I get him to attack me.
Right.
So I'm going to die.
And clearly Apollo does not like Kirk.
Yeah.
And he's the one that Apollo is going to go after.
And we're back on the Enterprise. Uhura is working with some sparky thing underneath the console. Which I love. Again, she's getting so much more to do in season 2.
For sure.
Speed is essential, Lieutenant.
Mr. Spock, I haven't done anything like this in years. If it isn't done just right, I could blow the entire communications system. It's very delicate work, sir.
And I love Spock's response. Instead of now, if Spock was still in his formative year back in the Galileo 7, his response to this might have been a little different.
Yep.
But what does he do? He gives her positive reinforcement.
I can think of no one better equipped to handle it, Miss Uhura. Please proceed.
This is the Spock who will always remember the lessons he learned in the Galileo 7.
Again, this is about leadership. She knows she has to go fast. Telling her she has to go fast when she's going as fast as she can isn't useful. giving her positive reinforcement is.
Absolutely.
Back on the planet, Apollo reappears on the throne room, and our guys aren't even looking at him.
I know you're trying to escape me. It's useless. I know everything you do. I try to be compassionate toward your kind.
You know nothing about our kind. You know only our remote ancestors who tremble before your tricks.
See, I think Kirk is 100% convinced that this guy was Apollo and that was real.
Yeah, he definitely is.
Yeah.
Especially after that talk, that conversation he had with McCoy.
I could sweep you out of existence with a wave of my hand and bring you back again. I can give life or death.
Which, by the way, these are not in Apollo's powers, according to Greek myth.
What else does mankind demand of its gods?
Mankind has no need for gods.
And I'm really curious to know what you think of this next part from Kirk. He says, "We find the one quite adequate."
So I think that line is extremely problematic. I wish it wasn't in the show.
I do too.
Because if we're saying that Kirk now believes that these were the gods for Greek myths, then we're also saying that Kirk believes in a monotheistic religion, and we can only assume that that's Christianity. I mean, Kirk's not a Muslim, as far as we know. He's not Jewish, although actually he is.
Yes, he actually is Jewish.
So it's like Star Trek is now, and you probably know, I'm guessing there were fights about this line.
That's a really good question. I don't know if there were fights about this line, but I think what's interesting is that this episode was shot 2 episodes after Metamorphosis. At the end of Metamorphosis, when Spock tells the companion who has merged with Commissioner Hedford that you cannot create life, and the companion Hedford responds, "That is for the maker of all things." So Gene Kuhn wrote that episode from start to finish. He was the only writer to work on that script. And now we are hearing Kirk say, "We find the one God quite sufficient." I think that's a line. I feel like that feels like it's a line from Kuhn. And I might be wrong. It might have been from Roddenberry because he did the final version of it. But I agree. I wish Kirk would have just left it as mankind has no need for gods. We're doing just fine on our own or something like that.
So they have put themselves between a rock and the hard place. So I have no problem with the creator of all things, because that's sort of a vague. There are things that we don't understand. You know, yes, I don't have power of life and death. That's beyond me. That's something. Creator of all things is vague. It's non-specific. We find the one God quite sufficient is saying a specific religion.
And it's also saying it with regards not just to the people of the Earth.
Yeah.
You're saying it to the entire, like everyone in the Federation of Planets.
Well, and the thing is, it's you know, I mean, we don't need to get into a long talk about religion. I'm raised Jewish, but I'm an atheist. And anytime anybody highlights this is the truth, they are essentially saying to everybody else who has a different truth, what you believe in is wrong.
I was raised Jewish as well, and I would say that I'm spiritual.
Okay.
I believe in something. I just don't know if it's this God that we.
Well, that would be agnostic.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think that in general, Star Trek has a philosophy of secular humanism. You know, it has a philosophy of what's important is us, and we will figure it out. And that morality is not necessarily derived from a particular religious stance, that it can come from wherever. And this line says something really different.
I agree. Yeah. That, even as when I was growing up, that line always stuck out to me. I was like, oh, he's saying that there's God, you know. But of course, growing up and having a much broader scope on life and everything, life, the universe, and everything.
Well, then the meaning's 42. That's totally different.
Yes. Here's the meaning of the question. What is the meaning of life? But this is it is definitely a line that is questionable.
Well, and I think what happened, they put themselves in a rock and a hard place, because if you say the Greek myth gods are real, and then you're not saying anything else, you're essentially saying, but the God that most of America believes in, we're not endorsing that at all.
I'm actually surprised, that Stan Robertson, who was the standard and practices executive in charge of Star Trek at NBC, that he was okay with that line. Maybe
I bet they pushed for that line. I bet NBC pushed for it. I have no evidence of this. But like the confirming a Christian ideology in the United States in the 60s and even today is not an unusual thing.
Right.
That is the accepted.
Yeah.
And there are many, many, many people who believe that the United States is a Christian country. That wouldn't, you couldn't guess at what my belief would be, but but there are certainly many, many people who believe that.
One of the many reasons why this episode holds up and why it's provocative in different ways and why it's definitely worthy of this kind of a conversation.
I offer you eternal rest and happiness according to the ancient ways. I ask little in return, but what I ask for, I insist upon.
So he's like, everything will be cool if you just worship me and do what I say.
Right, exactly. Slavery.
Yeah. And they don't look at him.
They turn back around.
Yep. Right before they go do what they're going to do, we hear Kirk say,
"Look after the girl."
And Apollo's going, you're going to gather laurels and you're going to sacrifice deer and all this stuff. And Kirk says, "Go!" And they all turn around and start laughing at him.
It's a great scene. And the music that's playing under the scene is actually George Dunning's score for Metamorphosis when Spock encounters the companion for the very first time.
Okay.
But it's great use of that score, and they're trying to overwhelm Apollo, and Palamas is trying to get in each of their faces, and they all keep pushing her away.
Yep. Because she doesn't know the plan.
Right, she doesn't know the plan. But, oh, wait a minute. If she did know the plan, would she have been for it?
Well, if Kirk had made his speech, you know, but and so she's trying to protect them really heroically, and Kirk is saying, "Hey, stop, stop!
You shall reap the rewards of your insolence.
We're tired of your phony fireworks.
Mortal, you have earned this.
No, don't.
Lieutenant.
Father doesn't destroy his children.
And Kirk is going, "Lieutenant," and it literally is, "I was ready to die." That's what he's saying. I was supposed to get killed to save all your lives. You're ruining it. That's essentially what's going on.
Yeah, he was ready.
Lieutenant.
Apollo, please. You know so much of love.
Which is an interesting statement coming from her. And she grabs his hand and says,
Please don't hurt them.
and he softens and says, "I shall be lenient with you for her sake."
You will make plans to bring the rest of your people down. Be sure your artisans bring tools. And
Kirk goes, sarcastically, I think,
"And you will supply the herds of sheep, and the pipes we will play, and the simple skins we'll wear for clothes."
I don't think Kirk is into living in this world.
Yeah.
You know, it just occurred to me.
What's that?
So if Apollo wins, do you know what the life of the crew of the Enterprise is?
I'm going to say the Paradise Syndrome.
The apple.
You're right.
Is that they're going to go and gather tribute to gods and the god and live simple lives.
But in this case, the god is not a machine.
Right.
Yeah. But I see your point.
Yeah.
you will dismantle your ship for the supplies you need, and I'll crush its empty hull.
Well, that was all Kirk needed to hear.
Yeah, that's like you're gonna kill the woman I love.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
I have been too patient. I shall be patient no longer.
And they disappear.
And they're like, what do we do now? Do we have it like basically do we have other options? And Kirk has one more idea.
One more, and it depends on the lieutenant's loyalty. If she fails us, we better get used to herding goats.
Well, what I like about what he says is he says it depends on the lieutenant's loyalty. And it's really interesting because what saved us in Where No Man Has Gone Before? It was the loyalty of Dr. Daner.
And what saved us in Space Seed?
It was Marla McGivers.
Marla McGivers at the last minute. Right.
Yep.
And now we have Palamas.
It was also our criticism of what Little Girls Are Made Of that Chapel didn't have that moment when she should have.
Right.
You know?
That's true.
I offer you more than your wildest dreams have ever imagined. You'll become the mother of a new race of gods. You'll inspire the universe. All men will revere you, almost as a god yourself.
All right. Now, for all these years, I thought that this scene was redundant of the previous scene where Apollo and Palamas are off in La La Land. Okay. But then rewatching this scene, knowing where this episode was supposed to go on a scene that was written, a scene that was filmed, and ultimately cut, and we'll get to it at the very end.
Oh.
So now we specifically hear Apollo say to Palamas, "You will become the mother of a new race of gods." Apollo was being literal.
Agreed.
You will become the mother of a new race of gods starting now.
So you're at the same question I was going to ask: is do they have sex?
Yes, they do.
I think 100% they do.
They absolutely have sex.
Not only do I think they have sex, I think it's really good sex.
I'll bet it's hot sex.
Yeah. Well, because he is a god of love. I mean, like, Apollo's got some moves. And what I love about it, too, just putting aside the sex part, is that what did Kirk just say? Everything is dependent upon her loyalty. And now Apollo has offered her the most amazing thing possible.
Okay, so what we did when we were talking about Space Seed, we basically asked the question when Khan shows up at MacGyver's quarters before they go to the dinner that they have sex, and we said, yeah, they did for sure. But in this case, it's not just we're assuming with strong conviction that they did. Like it was actually written.
Oh wow!
Because of something that is revealed in the coda to a filmed scene that was ultimately dropped before it made air. But he says to her, again, you will become the mother to a new race of gods. That was not just some idealistic, optimistic,
metaphorical statement.
No, it is a fact, because we're going to start right now with that. Because when we come back in Act 4 and Kirk is trying to reach the Enterprise with no luck, we see Palamas come back without Apollo, and she's got a big smile on her face.
Yes, she does.
What's happened to her?
What do you think happened to her, Scotty? And I'm sorry to say, this is going to break your heart.
Yeah.
But they had sex.
Yeah.
For sure they had sex.
And Scotty wants to go to her, and Kirk goes, no, I'll talk to her. And I love Chekhov goes,
perhaps if I assisted.
How old are you?
22, sir.
Then I'd better handle it.
Yeah. It's a funny little beat.
He'll give us everything we ever wanted, and he can do it, too.
Is she signed on to Apollo's plan? Is she ready to beam down and live here now at this moment?
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. She's bought into it. She's
100%.
in 100%. She's committed. There's no question. But that's going to change because she is just saying it's going to be puppy dogs and ice cream. Even though if we're going to have to sacrifice the puppy dogs, we're going to have all the ice cream we want.
All right, Lieutenant, you can come down from Mount Olympus now. You've got work to do.
William Shatner in this scene is perfect because he is being forceful with her.
He thrives on love, worship, attention.
Yes?
We can't give him that worship. None of us can, especially you.
Saying you've got to reject him. You've got to shun him, or we will all be condemned to a life of slavery, and we are so far out we will never get help.
Or perhaps the thought of spending an eternity bending knee and tending sheep appeals to you.
She doesn't see the light.
Oh, but you don't understand. He's kind, and he wants the best for us. And he's so lonely.
But what does Kirk do whenever he sees that something he is doing is not working? He learns from the situation, and he changes his strategy because he sits next to Palamas, says, give me your hand. He appeals to her on a human level, not as a superior and a subordinate, taking orders and being loyal to the service, but being loyal to your race.
We're the same. We share the same history, the same heritage, the same lives. We're tied together beyond any untying.
And he's basically being persuasive like he was with the companion, saying, you're different. We are the same. It is a beautiful speech. Shatner is right on point, pitch perfect with his performance here. And she sees the light, and she knows the right thing to do. She is devastated that she knows she's going to break his heart, although she doesn't know the extent to which she will break his heart. And what do you think of this scene, Steve?
So I have two thoughts. Actually, I have many thoughts. The first is I agree. I think Shatner's performance is great. I have a very different reaction to that second half of the scene because you're right. It relates to metamorphosis in two ways. One is what you just said, is that he says, look, you can't become one with a man because we're human and you're a big cloud of sparkly colors. But the other thing that it's also saying the opposite of what's in metamorphosis. Because in metamorphosis, when we hear that the companion loves the man and Cochrane gets all upset, they're like, look, love is love. It's a very love is love, different. Yeah, it's a different species. Doesn't matter.
Agreed.
It's still cool. And what he says here is a very human centric. You're a human. That's not a human. You got to stick with us. And I don't like that philosophy very much.
Okay. I see your point, and I agree with you. But in the case of Metamorphosis, it was the 4 of them on the planet, including Hedford. In this case, there's a threat to the Enterprise.
Well, this is the thing, is that, and it goes into, is it cool to say a thing that maybe isn't so cool to get a thing that is cool, which is saving the Enterprise?
Well, I think in the context of when this was written, what he was saying may have been more appropriate for the times than it is now. I agree that it's not as progressive. Okay, his speech to Palamas is not as progressive the way he was trying to reason with the companion in Metamorphosis. You're absolutely right about that. But I don't think he's wrong either.
Well, and it goes to this thing of what we've really seen as we've examined Star Trek closely is there are a lot of contradictions. There's a lot of this is true and the opposite is true. And
which is fine, by the way.
Which is fine. Well, I'll tell you, I've been meaning to say this forever. Doesn't apply that much here. But in terms of opposites, you know what I think is the most central opposite to all of Star Trek philosophy, or the one that is the symbol of everything, is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. And because the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many, which is Star Trek 3, is that those two, that contradiction. And that we hear, because when you first heard the needs of the many, you went, yes, that is irrefutable logic. And when they go off to find Spock and search for Spock and say, because the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many, you go, yes.
In both cases, he was right.
In both cases, they're right.
And you just answered the question about the paradoxes between the two persuasive arguments in Metamorphosis and Who Mourns for Adonais. In both cases, he is right.
Yeah.
Because in this case, well, the needs of the many did outweigh the needs of the few, but the needs of the one was a very, very powerful one.
Well, and one of the ways that we struggle in society is balancing the needs of the collective versus the needs of the individual. And we're seeing that it is a constant struggle. We're seeing that today. I'm not going to name what they are, but in a lot of the conflicts, it is about the needs of the group versus the needs of the individual. And there are times where we have to say, no, the needs of the individual are paramount. Even though it's going to cause a lot of trouble, you can't force that one person to do that thing.
But I agree with you.
And there are other times where we go, no, you know what? You're going to have to give up a little bit of your freedom, a little bit of your wealth, your rights, in order for the greater good. And they're both true.
And in this case, I mean, you just pointed out in the clearest possible way what the paradox of both of those classic lines from Trek 2 and Trek 3, why the argument in Metamorphosis fits and why this argument also fits.
The other thing I think about this scene is I think, on some level, this scene is Edith Keeler must die. The fate of the Enterprise is based on you hurting and essentially killing the person that you love.
Okay, mind blown. You are right. You are right. I never saw it that way because I just didn't see Palamas as a character.
Because you're not as involved in her love story.
Right.
But there's no question that she loves him.
Also, she's not Kirk. She's not this character we've been following for every episode. But you are right. This is Kirk saying, do as your heart tells you to do.
And we're all
428
slaves.
will die who did not die before.
Yeah.
Yep, you're right.
Lieutenant, you have your orders and your duty.
Yes, sir. My orders and my duty.
You're absolutely right. Holy cow, Steve.
Well, what's so fun, and this is why doing the show with you is so fun, is there these episodes that I've watched a million times, and I go, damn, there's more here.
We need to teach a course on this.
We are.
Yes, we do. We are. It's called Enterprise Incidents.
Yeah.
But, okay, ladies and gentlemen, listening, that is an excellent... so much to ask you what you think of this scene between Kirk and Palamas. Is Kirk right to show the situation and really lay it out to Palamas the way he did? And do you think it's fair to compare Kirk's speech to Palamas to Spock's speech to Kirk in City on the Edge of Forever? Go over to our Facebook page and let us know.
Enterprise to Captain Kirk. Come in, Captain.
Kirk here.
Spock here, Captain.
We've pinpointed a power source on the planet's surface which seems to have something to do with the force field. Is there a structure of some sort near you?
There is indeed, Mr. Spock.
And he says we can punch through to create some openings and fire some phasers.
Have Mr. Sulu lock all phaser banks onto the structure. Fire on my order only, and cut it fine. We'll be standing nearby.
And Spock's like, maybe don't stand so nearby.
Yeah, right.
I must say, Apollo, the way you ape human behavior is remarkable.
The word ape is key.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is insulting. I mean, that is and it's from a superior position. You say ape.
But there are some other things I must know. Your evolutionary patterns and your social development.
And he is just like, huh?
What are you doing?
We were just all
just had
romantic.
sex.
We just did a thing.
I've never encountered a specimen like you before.
A specimen, right?
Yeah.
I'm a scientist. Leslie Parrish is great in this scene.
Well, that's what I said. I thought she was stiff in the beginning, and I think here she's really good.
I am Apollo. I've chosen you.
Well, I'm sure that's very flattering, but I must get on with my work now.
I think that she redeems herself in a way that's much more effective than MacGyver's.
100%.
In Spacey. Mm-hmm.
I think MacGyver's, as we said in that, she's a troubling character.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't think Palamas is.
Well, surely you know I've only been studying you.
Studying me?
And he says, I don't believe it. You love me. And you know what? He's right.
Yeah.
She is lying. He shouldn't believe this.
Right.
She does love him. Also, by the way, one of the things that's really interesting is if you pay attention to how much reverb they put on Apollo's voice is really key. In the beginning of the scene when they were just talking, not a lot of reverb. And then when he says, I don't believe it, you love me. And that gets more reverb. He's becoming more the god again.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good point. Like when he says to Kirk at the end of Act 1, let the lesson begin, welcome to Olympus, there's a lot of reverb because he's pissed.
Yeah. And this next line, man, this is not cool to say to someone you just had sex with.
Love you? Be logical. I'm not some simple shepherdess you can awe. Well, I could no more love you than I could love a new species of bacteria.
Ouch.
Dude.
Ouch. I mean, like, she doesn't just reject him. She stabs him in the back and kind of twirls the knife around a little bit while it's still in his back.
And he gets mad, and we start to get like a storm, and he says, I forbid you to go. I order you to stay.
Yeah, and she says to him,
Is that the secret of your power over women? The thunderbolts you throw?
Double ouch.
That's a great line. That's a really great line. And what's funny, the note I wrote here is this is actually worse than letting Edith Keeler die. Because Kirk didn't push her in front of a car. This is attacking the person that she loves.
But you're right. Kirk just kind of...
He just had to do nothing, and he had to stop Bones.
Yeah, he didn't kind of do anything. He had to stop Bones. That was a big deal. But you're right. He doesn't throw her in front of the car.
Yeah. And the storm is starting, and there's lightning. By the way, this totally made me think of What's Opera Doc when Bugs Bunny, when Elmer Fudd is creating lightning.
South winds blow.
Yeah.
Smog!
Exactly.
What's Opera Doc?
Spock is picking up on the storm that's happening, and Kirk says, fire on my signal. And we see her just getting destroyed in this storm.
So on the set, on stage 10, while this was being filmed, the lights came down, the lightning effects are going on, and Leslie Parrish is desperately trying to hold her glued-on gown in place. And we see that Apollo is become like this giant image. Yeah. And is closing in on her with the lightning and the thunder going on and the wind. Now, this scene was referred to by the writers and the producers as the Rape of the Wind scene. And it was filmed on day 7 of the production of this episode. The Rape of the Wind. So maybe there's something...
It's not good what she's going through.
Definitely not. But there's something that is revealed at the end of this deleted scene. And I'm not sure if that happened in the scene at the end of Act 3 or if it happened at this moment now, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Mr. Spock, fire those phasers.
Well, he's still standing right at the thing.
Yeah, okay, Captain, you're too close. Fire those phasers!
Well, but he stops to say it. Like, why is he not...
It's just dramatic.
It's like, why don't you move away a little quicker? Like, why are you stopping?
He's just being Shatner dramatic for the camera. But he says, great. He says, to fire those phasers.
All phaser banks, fire.
Then you hear that great Enterprise fanfare from Gerald Fried, and the Enterprise is firing the phasers on the temple.
Yep.
And Apollo appears. He's firing his lightning bolts at the Enterprise. The Enterprise is keeping those phasers on fire, and the temple starts to glow. It is starting to buckle under the pressure of the power of the Starship Enterprise. And Palamas appears, and she is completely
Just
disheveled.
wrecked, yeah.
Like, she looks like she was literally, for lack of a better word here, going to the title of the scene that just came before it, raped by Apollo. And Scotty goes to help her. Apollo is doing everything he can to fire his lightning bolts. And that last stop, it goes. It is such an amazing scene. The acting of Michael Forrest, the direction by Mark Daniels, and of course the score by Gerald Fried. It is, for 1967 on television, this is really top of the line stuff, and it still is in the 21st century.
It's brutal. It is everything is kind of coming together, and the moment of sadness after the temple is destroyed is just brutal.
I would have cherished you, cared for you. I would have loved you as a father loves his children.
Do you think he means this? Do you think he would have behaved that way?
That was his plan.
I think he would have. I think he thinks that he would have done that. The problem with the paternal stance is if the father figure knows everything that his kids need, then he would, but he doesn't.
But Michael Forrest, in his delivery, walking through the rubble of where his temple used to be, after being no match for the Enterprise, ultimately. Again, the range of Michael Forrest, to see him so beaten and defeated. You talked about one of the gods standing in front of the wind until only the wind remained. And we're about to see that played out. Apollo saying, "I would have cherished you." It's so sad.
Yeah.
And Kirk saying,
"We've outgrown you."
5,000 years ago, the people around the Mediterranean outgrew the gods. So you can imagine that in the 23rd century, they've outgrown them even more. And this was a lesson that Apollo just did not even consider. But do you think Kirk went too far? We talked in other episodes, Steve, where you think that Kirk went too far, like obviously a taste of Armageddon. He went too far. Did he go too far in this episode?
I think there were pathways that weren't explored that might have helped. But I also think, it goes to like, the Enterprise is clearly under threat. This is a super powerful guy. This was the only way they could get out. But maybe there was another pathway earlier somewhere.
The reason I asked that is because in Devil in the Dark, the Horta was the last of its kind.
Right.
Okay.
And so is Apollo.
In the Man Trap, the salt vampire of M113 was the last of its kind. Apollo is the last of its kind. But Apollo has had time with people on Earth. This is a direct threat to the Enterprise. What he is proposing is absolutely slavery. And they have to defend themselves. So in this case, I think Kirk is absolutely 100% warranted. He absolutely did the right thing. This was his only choice under the circumstances. What choice did he have?
Like I said, I think there were pathways that maybe could have taken if Apollo could be reasonable at all, which maybe he can't be. But they didn't try to reason with him, really. And the examples you give are excellent, because I think in Devil in the Dark, they come up with a compromise that actually benefits everybody.
Exactly.
And in Man Trap, one of the things we said a long time ago when we did that episode was, man, if only they could say, listen, we got plenty of salt. Like, let's work out a deal. You don't actually have to kill people, and you can live and get lots of salt, and it will be fine.
And that episode would have probably played out that way if it was
you had
produced
Gene Coon.
later.
I don't actually think that being a shepherd and bringing tributes to a god and wandering around in a pastoral setting is slavery unless you don't want to do it. If you don't want to do it, it's slavery. I wish they could have said, listen, Apollo, we got these missions, we got a lot of stuff we got to do, but there are a whole bunch of people, like there are these people in this side of paradise that they wanted an agricultural pastoral setting. There are a whole bunch of people that would love to come out here and worship you and farm, and they could come visit you. It could be a vacation planet, and you could get some worshipers, and you could hang out with people, and it would all be great.
Yeah.
But we can't stay here right now.
Right.
Well, even, you know what, Lieutenant Palamas, she can stay with you, and you can hang out, and you can have little god babies, and we'll maybe bring some other people, and it'll all be cool. But they didn't do that.
But what's haunting about this episode is the way that when Apollo grows to giant form, like he did at the end of Act 1, his temple destroyed.
Zeus! Hermes! Hera! You were right.
And the way he says, "Take me."
Take me.
The way it echoes and he disappears. What does that remind you of?
It's Charlie X.
It's Charlie X.
I want to stay.
But it is still just as haunting. This is it's a sad episode.
I wish we hadn't had to do this.
So do I. They gave us so much. The way they began the Golden Age. Would it have hurt us, I wonder, just to have gathered a few laurel leaves?
That is the end of the episode that we saw.
Oh, okay.
That is not the end of the episode that was filmed. In all of the versions of this story, from concept to final draft, there is a scene that is included in the script, and it was filmed, and it was ultimately dropped by NBC censors who felt very nervous about the inclusion of the scene. For many years, it was assumed that the scene was not shot because the scene is included in the James Blish adaptation of Who Mourns for Adonais that appeared in the book Star Trek VII. But the Roddenberry Vault, which is a Blu-ray documentary series that came out in 2006, that is deleted scenes. You can see that they did actually film this scene. McCoy comes on the bridge and says to Kirk and Spock, "I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, but Lieutenant Palamas became a little ill at breakfast this morning." I'm paraphrasing. This is not exactly what he says.
Oh. And we all know what it means when any woman is sick in the morning in an episode of television.
She's pregnant.
She's pregnant.
She is pregnant with Apollo's baby.
Wow.
The scene was filmed. You can find the scene on the Roddenberry Vault Blu-ray, or part of the scene, the Spock camera. And there is a book that came out a couple years ago called Star Trek Lost Scenes that has like photos from this deleted scene. So they actually did film it, but they dropped it. And I got to say, that's a shame, because that would have been, talk about provocative for 1967.
I'm sure that's why it wasn't on the. I'm sure that's why they didn't broadcast it.
But you know, Palamas had a kid. It was Apollo's baby. Now, when was it conceived? Is the question. Like we're not assuming anything. The fact is that the scene was filmed. It was in the script.
Right. They had sex.
Pregnant. They had sex
at least once, maybe twice.
Maybe twice. One, or maybe twice, maybe three times, because at the end of each.
Sure.
Okay, there's two scenes between Apollo and Palamas that end with a kiss that could have gone further.
Right.
So any one of those, they could have followed that up with them having sex. But there was also the rape of the wind scene. Oh. So did Apollo actually rape Palamas at that moment? And that's when she was, that the baby was conceived.
Oh.
So I don't know the answer to this. Curious to know what all of our listeners think. When do you think Apollo's baby was conceived throughout the intercourse in Who Mourns for Adonais? Head to our Facebook page and let us know. And here's the other question. Do you think it was right for NBC to drop this crucial coda scene from Who Mourns for Adonais? Head to our Facebook page, Enterprise Incidents, and let us know what you would have thought about the scene being included in the final episode.
So, you know how we've talked about how much the things we've learned about these episodes has enhanced our viewing experience and made them deeper and more interesting.
Yep.
This is a case, the knowledge that the scene was called Rape of the Wind, where I don't want that in my brain.
Yeah.
I think that makes the episode worse. I think it's terrible. I think it damages what I think about the character of Apollo, you know, because I am sympathetic with him. So I'm going to pretend I don't know that.
Okay, well, you know what? Again, that this is a speculation. I'm not saying that if the writers and the producers refer to it during filming as Rape of the Wind, but that doesn't mean that she was raped. Right. That's just what we're alluding to.
And
it's
we
also,
weren't nearly so sensitive about some of these words then as we are today.
Right, sure. And well, that's also a very good point. So I actually think the baby was conceived at the end of the third act.
That's what I would think too.
Because when
he says you'll be the mother of gods.
You'll be the mother of gods, and when Palamas comes back with the big smile on her face, and Sky says what happened to her, I think it all points to like they did. That's when they had sex, and that's when the baby was conceived. But I actually think that this episode, like so many others we discussed, Steve, has gone way up in my estimation. And I always held it in high regard anyway. I think it's a great episode. Again, just it's so provocative. It's so provocative. And even though we've linked it to other episodes that I never thought to link it to before, I still think it is a superior top-tier episode. And it is one that Mark Daniels, who directed it, hailed as his favorite Star Trek episode of all the ones that he directed, saying it all came together so well. Fred Steiner, who composed the score, said, quote, "It's my favorite score, and I think one of the very best episodes of Star Trek. It has a little bit of everything, and there are some moments that I'm very proud of, particularly where I developed Captain Kirk's theme with a duet for the French horn." Walter Koenig said, quote, "Michael Forrest is a terrific actor. He was actually perfect in that role. Great presence and great resonance. So you believe the godlike figure, but what made it for me was the vulnerability of that character. Even though he's this massive man that's used to giving orders, he is tragically needy." I think that's absolutely accurate. Leslie Parrish, played Lieutenant Palamas, says, "Whenever I watch it, I go right back to the whole thing again and cry my way through it. I relive it. My impression is that it's one piece that I am very, very proud of. Of all the work I did, that is outstanding because it is rooted in something in which I believe so deeply." Michael Forrest, the last word comes from Apollo himself. "That show has given me more mileage than any show I ever did. And I did some pretty good films over the years. But people ask me what I'm most recognized for, and I say it has to be Star Trek."
I'll tell you my thoughts. I have kind of a bunch of different thoughts. The first one is, I think this is the first true Star Trek team episode where everybody is involved. Uhura's doing some work, Sulu's doing work, Chekhov is obviously doing things. It's not a big three episode, it's a team episode. With Kirk still being the center of the team, of course. And Spock shines, McCoy has things to do. Like, they're all working together. That's the first thing.
I agree with you. I think Friday's Child saw
some of it.
Definitely had a representation of that. But this is a more fully realized depiction of that.
The one weakness is the one that we've already talked about, which is Scotty's character. It's just like they just lost what I love about Scotty.
Yeah, like I understand Scotty's. He's a lonely guy and completely lovesick over Palamas, but he just goes a little too far with it.
Well, and this does the thing that Star Trek does so well of not really having a bad guy, is that in the end, yes, he's our antagonist. Yes, we have to fight against him, but we also like him on some levels and feel really bad for him at the end.
Yeah, really, there's a lot of empathy for Apollo.
And I think the ideas of, well, what is the nature of a god? What is a god? What does a god need from us? And what do we need from a god? And of course, and the difference, as you pointed out, of the difference between a god and God with a capital G. And it has have we now said that the Greek myths are true? Is that canon? And B, have we said that the Federation believes in a monotheistic religion? And that is one of and they're both sort of odd ones in terms of canon for me.
It's really something. We would love to hear your thoughts about this episode, how how it resonates, especially after this conversation. But Steve, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me at SR Morris on Twitter, at SR Morris1 on Instagram. They can find the show at Enter Incidents on Twitter, Enterprise Incidents on Instagram. And of course, the best way to find the show is to subscribe, because then you don't have to find it. It finds you.
Ooh, imagine that.
Yeah, so if you go to Apple Podcasts, you can hit subscribe there, but you could also do it on Spotify. You can go to YouTube. On Apple Podcasts, as we say every time, please leave a review if you haven't done so already. And I can tell by the numbers that there are a few thousand of you who haven't. We would love you to leave those reviews. And if you leave your comments on YouTube, it's always fun to interact with you there. And if you want to listen to my other show, The Cinephiles, and maybe you want to hear shows that have to do with gods and religion, well, you might want to first of all start off with Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade.
That's a good one.
You could go to Amadeus, which continues to speculate about the nature of God. If you have a sense of humor about religion and you can deal with maybe some sarcastic takes on religion, there is no better film than Monty Python's The Life of Brian. And a more, let's say, respectful version might be Ben-Hur. The Seventh Seal, Ingmar Bergman's film, speculates on the meaning of life and God and death. And you know what my favorite film that has a god in it is? Carl Reiner's Oh, God.
Oh.
One of my absolutely favorite movies.
1977 or
77.
78? Oh,
Yeah.
77. Yeah, Bob Denver. I remember seeing that movie when I was a little kid.
It's so good.
Yeah.
I rewatched it for the show last year, and I'm like, oh my God, this movie is so wise and so smart and funny. It's a really good film.
Yeah, it's got everything. It definitely does.
Scott, how would people find you?
Well, you find me on Twitter and Instagram at MovieMance. And like Steve said, please subscribe, wherever you're able to listen to Enterprise Incidents. And very important, we are so grateful for all the great feedback that we've gotten from all of you on Enterprise Incidents. And it's been really, really amazing feedback. We're so very, very proud of the show. We just would love for more people to hear it. So if there's anything you can do to help us out in that respect, please do so by sharing Enterprise Incidents with as many people as you can. Don't assume that they already know about the show. Please share it with them. And whether they are the diehard fans of the original series, more casual Star Trek fans who maybe have kind of dabbled in TOS, but please share the show. But what I want to share with you is a moment that Steve, I know you're going to be just as excited for, which is the next episode of Enterprise Incidents. When we first talked about doing this podcast, I remember thinking, wow, there are some really, really great episodes that we're going to do our deep dives on, like absolutely iconic, great episodes that are among the very, 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 very best of Star Trek. But I feel like, man, we're so far from that. We got to start we got to do Mud's Women. We got to do Miri. We got a lot to get to before we get to those really great ones. Well, that time has come again after City on the Edge of Forever. That was a big one. This next one is also a biggie. On the next episode of Enterprise Incidents, we go to Vulcan for the very first time. We are doing a mock time. Cue that music right now. Very excited for the next episode of Enterprise Incidents. Please join us, and until then, keep going boldly.